Developing tonight, a group of rookie officers is on their way out, according to the NYPD. Sources tell us they never should have been hired in the first place.
So why were they then patrolling our streets?
Why were they patrolling our streets is in fact the million-dollar question. Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about a bit of a controversy that has broken out with the NYPD, in which they basically hired around 31 officers that were not qualified to even meet the lowered standards for an NYPD officer, and their disqualification criteria could be rooted in things like lying about previous criminal convictions and failures of the psych evaluation, which is honestly and genuinely one of the scariest things that you can possibly imagine. But the thing is, when you have the after effects of the George Floyd riots, of the BLM riots, and of course the movement to defund the police, and the NYPD is desperate to bolster their ranks, this is not surprising as an outcome. We've talked about on this channel how the drop in ranks for police officers in various departments around the country has led to spending more money on the limited number of officers via overtime, but it's also led to a bunch of lowerings of certain criteria that ultimately end up producing officers that are less qualified, less competent, and of course officers that are overworked, which is never a good combination. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Tonight, stunning news. Dozens of cops allegedly unfit to serve on the force and on the street. The investigation sparked after it was revealed the recruits failed their psych evaluation. Looking deeper, the sources say the department discovered they also allegedly lied during the application process. For example, failing to disclose prior license suspensions, arrests, even criminal convictions.
So look, obviously this is a disastrous story for a number of reasons. First and foremost, you put a lot of time, energy, and resources into these individuals who should have been disqualified right away if these reports are believed to be true. And of course, you gave them a gun, a badge, and authority and put them out on the streets in order to allegedly fight crime. However, when you hear about the past criminal convictions, you start to realize that maybe you set yourself up for a situation where you have a bunch of dirty or mentally unfit police officers. Now, of course, the local news segment addresses some of the aspects of this story, but one of the things that I find to be a bit more interesting is the report from the New York Post that also highlights many of these issues, and of course has a good source, a good rationale for why the NYPD is in fact lowering standards. And one of the reasons why they're doing this is because the number of NYPD officers is actually down 14% from a high in the year 2000, in which there were 40,200 sworn officers in the NYPD, making it not only the largest police department in the United States of America, but the largest civilian police department in the entire world. Of course, certain countries use their military as their police interchangeably. We don't do that except for special occasions in the United States of America, so they are the largest standard police department in the world. And due to the fact that the NYPD, and I know a lot of officers are going to say the pay is not that good, pays a reasonably decent amount, but again, it's in New York City, so you can understand why it's not that great compared to the cost of living. The NYPD traditionally has higher standards than other departments across the country, and those standards have been lowering. One of the things that the New York Post actually documents is that they actually lowered the speed that you need to run for a 1.5-mile run in order to be an NYPD officer before deciding to reverse course on this, because they felt that even that lowering of the standards was far too much and ended up creating a situation where you had a bunch more out-of-shape police officers making it past the cut. Now, a lot of people are going to attribute them hiring people with criminal convictions to some kind of a DEI push, but I need this to be clear to everybody out there in the audience. The NYPD is actually pretty reflective of New York City's population already, so while there may be some elements of DEI in there, I really think the driving force behind this in reality is the fact that the recruitment numbers have just gone down, and the NYPD has responded in the same way that many departments have responded, by lowering standards. It's just that they're lowering standards in this area, and that seems well beyond the point of no return for getting quality candidates. Again, it seems like a basic thing where if you want to be a cop, you can't also be a criminal, you can't also be mentally unfit to be a cop, but apparently these guys got through despite the fact that according to the media, they received notices telling them of their disqualification and that they could not be hired on as police officers.
According to the NYPD, the officers were initially told they were barred, quote, receiving final notices of disqualification, yet somehow they were still hired. Here's former NYPD Lieutenant Darren Porcher.
If the allegations are investigated and they're deemed to be credible or quote unquote true, then these individuals should not be police officers.
An NYPD spokesperson says the department was not legally allowed to hire these individuals and was forced to inform them they could no longer continue.
Now look, obviously this is the case. If you have people that lied on their applications to become police officers and or failed psychological evaluations, then they should not be on the force. But the thing is that they're already on the force. They're already members of the union, so they had forced resignations and firings of a bunch of these different officers, but the union has to represent them because they're technically members. So of course we have a situation where a judge actually stalled out them removing them from the NYPD. I also want to point out that this guy, for some unusual reason, put truth in quotes, which again, if it is true, if it is the truth, then you don't have to air quotes it or verbally air quotes it, if that's what you want to call it. It just happens to be a fact, and it happens to be a major issue that, by the way, a lot of police departments are facing. Again, we talk about the damage of the defund the police movement, which of course will become worse with Zohran Mamdani, who might be the mayor of the city of New York at the end of this year, starting on January 1st, who, by the way, doesn't believe police officers should even go to domestic violence situations. So if you're being beaten by your boyfriend and or husband, you have to deal with a female social worker trying to talk you out of it rather than a police officer that can arrest that individual. And again, it's only going to get worse and the standards are only going to get lower. But of course, if you have worse officers that are working harder due to overtime getting out of control, you're going to have more instances in which the Mamdani types will use in order to attack the police as an institution. Now, a lot of the blame seems to be leveled at a guy called Terrell Anderson, who was the NYPD inspector at the time, and supposedly he may be up for NYPD departmental charges due to the fact that his oversight seems to allow so many of these officers to join the force, be hired on, despite the fact that they had disqualification notices, and it is a violation of state law to hire them on to be police. Now, Anderson did lead the candidate assessment division during this period of time, and the recruits did get their notices of disqualification, as I told you earlier on, so it should have been easy for them to not be hired, but apparently that is just something that was undone for some unknown reason.
But the police officers union pushing back, quote, these police officers aren't responsible for the NYPD's broken hiring process. The PBA president saying, quote, as far as they knew, they were qualified to be officers because the NYPD hired and trained them.
Now look, I understand the case that is being made from the union rep for the NYPD, but you need to understand that he's supposed to advocate for his members no matter what. But to be clear, there is some merit to the point where these guys didn't really know that they weren't qualified to be police officers, or that they failed their psych exam, or that they would be barred completely by state law from being hired based on the idea that the NYPD did in fact hire them. Now, of course, if they had previous arrests and or convictions that they did not disclose, if they lied during the application process, whatever percentage of the 31 officers that is proven to be true, then obviously they did know they had intent to deceive. They should have been caught in that deception. All indications are that they were caught in that deception, and yet they were allowed to pass through. And even if they've been on the force for a year or 6 months and they haven't had an incident so far, this is not really a risk that many people are willing to take.
Another great question regarding the hiring process. Are drug tests are required? Absolutely, guys.
This all happening in the midst of a mass exodus at the department. Data shows in 2023, hundreds more officers left the force than joined.
So as you can see by the numbers right there, they are losing about 500 officers net. And the thing is, a lot of the officers that they're losing are older officers that are going into retirement, or some of the best officers that are going into early retirement, and you're replacing them with rookies, which is often going to lead to a brain drain under the best circumstances. But then we hear about how they're forced to lower standards because recruitment criteria just cannot be met by the current pool that they have. And the example that they gave right there, which to be clear, a lot of departments have no college credit requirements in order to join up with them, is the 60 credit threshold that for almost all of my life was a requirement to be an NYPD officer.
In response, this year, the police commissioner reduced the number of college credits required to become a cop.
In 2023, this requirement led to the disqualification of 29% of NYPD applicants, meaning we turned away 2,275 potential officers. We can't afford to do that any longer.
Now, this is technically the qualifications to get an associate's degree, but I want to make it clear, it is in fact a 60 credits, regardless of if you have an associate's degree or not, requirement that they have lowered due to the fact that they're disqualifying a bunch of officers. Now, I don't know if lowering of that particular standard is going to lead to a bunch of downstream negative results, but the fact is, it was an elevated standard that the NYPD could easily have due to the fact that they were normally flooded with people who wanted to be NYPD officers from around the city. Now we're spending more money on recruitment. Now there's a bonus structure in order to get people to sign up. There's a lowering of the physical standards, or at least changing them because they got lowered and then they got put back. But other standards are being lowered all at the same time that we're not recruiting people that, again, have the adequate college credits that they had before due to the fact that there's so many issues going on with the police department right now in the city of New York. And again, Mamdani has said that he's not going to fill the vacant seats for the NYPD. He's just going to cut overtime if he gets into office, thus making him a defund the police kind of candidate. And he said repeatedly that he's in favor of defund the police, although in this mayoral campaign, he's dancing around that position because, again, the guy is fundamentally dishonest. So yeah, you end up in a situation where you have a bunch of unqualified officers that would not have met the previous standards. You're paying more for a department that is doing less, that has less recruits, and of course crime has not gone back down to where it was pre-Black Lives Matter riots. That nearly 2.5-decade trend of crime dropping in the city of New York had been undone, and it's really unfortunate that this is the state of the city of New York right now. And of course, based on the current polling with the Cuomo and of course Eric Adams taking votes from one another, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. But again, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute madness going on in the NYPD. Till next time.